Maddie was famous for using her image and charm to represent powerful corporations. And her biggest triumph seemed to arrive when she closed the largest partnership of her career with ProTech. Confident and untouchable, she walked into the first meeting already convinced she was the smartest person in the room. When she met the new CEO, Josh, young and black, her smile carried a quiet contempt. During the meeting, she switched to Italian, mocking him openly, convinced he would not understand a single word. What Maddie didn't know was that Josh was fluent in several languages, including Italian. When he calmly answered her in flawless Italian, the room fell silent. In that moment, her arrogance cracked, and something shifted. Josh didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her. He simply showed her, with dignity and precision, that she had underestimated the wrong man. From that day on, Josh began to plan his response, not with anger, but with intelligence and patience. Every move was calculated, every decision deliberate. He let Maddie believe she was still in control, while quietly setting the stage for a reckoning that would expose her prejudice and reshape everything around them. What started as a moment of humiliation would grow into a story of power, resilience, and a revenge built not on destruction, but on brilliance. You might think you already know how this ends, but the real story goes much deeper than that. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story truly began. Josh liked to arrive early. It wasn't a habit born from anxiety or control, but from memory. From a lifetime of knowing what it felt like to enter rooms where no one expected him to belong. The ProTech conference room was quiet when he stepped inside, glass walls reflecting the pale Chicago morning. The city stretched beyond the windows like a promise he had already fought to earn. He placed his tablet at the head of the table, loosened his jacket, and took a slow breath. Today mattered. Not because of numbers or contracts, but because of people. He still believed, perhaps stubbornly, that companies could carry values the way people carried scars. The door slid open again and Sarah entered, efficient as always. She gave him a small smile, the kind that said, "I've got your back," without ever needing to say it out loud. "They're all confirmed," she said quietly, including Maddie. Josh nodded. He had read her profile twice. Polished, charismatic, philanthropic in paper. He wanted to believe the best. He always did. Minutes later, the room filled with board members, advisors, quiet murmurs. And then, the temperature shifted. Maddie arrived late, not rushed, not apologetic. She entered as if the room had been holding its breath just for her. Her heels echoed sharply against the floor, each step confident, practiced. She wore elegance like armor-perfect hair, tailored dress, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her gaze swept the room, assessing, categorizing, valuable, irrelevant, useful. Josh was kneeling near the head of the table, adjusting a loose cable beneath the screen. He didn't look up right away. He never needed to announce himself. Maddie barely spared him a glance. She turned to her assistant and whispered something with a faint smirk, assuming discretion, assuming safety, assuming superiority. Josh stood, dusted his hands lightly against his cuffs, and moved to his seat at the head of the table. The shift was immediate. Maddie's smile froze, not vanished, but faltered, like a practiced mask slipping half a second too late. Her eyes flicked from the chair to his face, recalculating. Josh smiled warmly. "Maddie," he said, extending his hand. "I'm glad you could make it. I've followed your charity initiatives for years. The work in Milan especially, it takes heart to stay involved beyond the cameras." For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed her face. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation at being seen too clearly. "Of course," she replied, shaking his hand. Her grip was firm, her voice smooth. Impact matters. He believed her, or wanted to. They took their seats. The meeting began. Numbers, projections, community initiatives. Josh spoke with quiet clarity, his tone inclusive, thoughtful. He asked questions. He listened. He thanked people by name. Maddie listened too, but with detachment. Then, leaning slightly toward her assistant, she spoke again, this time in Italian. Soft, sharp, careless. "Can you believe they put a diversity hire in charge?" she murmured, lips barely moving. "He looks like he should be parking my car, not running a tech empire." "This will be an easy paycheck." She smiled, confident in her privacy. Confident in the old assumption that language was a wall, not a bridge. The room fell silent, not dramatically, not all at once, just a subtle, collective stillness-like breath being held without permission. Josh didn't react immediately. His smile faded slowly, not into anger, but into something colder, something steadier. He straightened his cuffs with deliberate calm, lifted his gaze to meet hers, and spoke also in Italian. Flawless, elegant, precise. "Signorina," he said evenly, "underestimate me at your own peril. But if you wish to collect a paycheck here, you will learn respect, or you will learn the exit." The words landed heavy. Maddie's face drained of color. Her confidence collapsed inward, replaced by shock so raw it stripped away her Polish. Around the table, board members stared openly now, some stunned, some uncomfortable, all awake. Josh held her gaze, not with cruelty but with certainty. This wasn't revenge, it was a boundary. And for the first time since entering the room, Maddie realized she had made a catastrophic mistake, not in what she said, but in whom she had underestimated. The meeting continued, but nothing was the same. Josh waited 3 days before making his move. Not out of hesitation, but intention. He understood power differently than Maddie did. For her, it was spectacle rooms, cameras, applause. For him, power lived in patience, in allowing people just enough rope to reveal who they truly were. The reassignment memo landed in Maddie's inbox on a quiet Tuesday morning. Community Outreach Division, it read. She stared at the words as if they were an insult written in ink. Outreach was where reputations went to stagnate. No donors in evening gowns. No champagne flutes. Just early mornings, cramped offices, community centers with flickering lights, and people who asked uncomfortable questions about follow-through and promises. Josh framed it gently when he announced it in the executive meeting. "Before we expand," he said calmly, fingers folded on the table, "we need leadership that understands our roots. The soul of the brand isn't upstairs, it's on the ground. Community outreach will give us that clarity." His eyes met Maddie's for only a second. She forced a smile, but her jaw tightened. Inside, rage burned hot and humiliating. This wasn't a role, it was exile. And worse, she couldn't walk away. Her lawyers had warned her. The contract clause was airtight. Quitting early would cost her millions. Pride had signed the papers. Now pride was the cage. That afternoon, she stormed into her office, slammed the door, and laughed bitterly to herself. "If he wants a war," she muttered, opening her laptop, "I'll give him incompetence." She booked a venue for the upcoming charity event, an address that looked legitimate, professionally listed, polished. It didn't exist, a ghost of a building removed from city records years ago. Her plan was simple: let the event implode publicly. Let donors arrive to nothing. Let fingers point upward. Josh Sterling, visionary CEO, incompetent leader. She leaned back in her chair, satisfied for the first time since the boardroom humiliation. This wasn't cruelty, she told herself. This was survival. Across the building, Sarah watched the email confirmation appear on her screen. She didn't smile. She had known Maddie would do something like this, not because she was evil, but because she was cornered. Sarah walked the quiet hall to Josh's office, knocked once, and entered. "It's done," she said softly. "The venue booking." Josh closed his eyes for a moment, not in relief, in acceptance. "Does it exist?" he asked. "No." He nodded. "Let it stand." Sarah hesitated. If donors show up, they won't, Josh replied. Not yet. He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the city, at the streets where ambition and desperation brushed shoulders every day. She thinks I'm punishing her, he said quietly. I'm not. I'm giving her space to choose who she wants to be. Sarah watched him carefully. She had seen this look before, not anger, but resolve sharpened by disappointment. She won't choose well, Sarah said. No, Josh agreed, but others will see. The days that followed were slow and uncomfortable. Maddie was forced into neighborhoods she had only ever referenced in speeches. She shook hands stiffly, avoided eye contact, complained about parking and scheduling. Her discomfort radiated, and people felt it. Josh, meanwhile, said nothing. He attended quietly when needed. He listened. He took notes. He allowed silence to do the work shouting never could. Then, the invitation arrived. Cream-colored paper, elegant script, anonymous sender, a masquerade ball, the future of ProTech unveiled. Maddie's pulse quickened as she read it. This was it. The return to relevance. The reminder that she belonged in rooms where mystery and power danced together. Whatever Josh was planning, whatever small punishment he thought he had delivered, this proved she was still essential. She smiled at her reflection, already imagining the whispers, the chandeliers, the eyes turning toward her. She didn't know she was walking into a mirror, one that would finally force her to see herself. The ballroom breathed history. Gold and shadow intertwined beneath vaulted ceilings, chandeliers refracting light into 1,000 fractured stars. Masks softened faces, turned certainty into mystery. Maddie moved through it all like she belonged to the architecture itself, laughing lightly, touching arms at precisely the right moment, letting investors feel chosen in her presence. She spoke warmly, intimately, and always, inevitably, she spoke of Josh. Visionary, yes, she said with a sympathetic tilt of her head. But vision without refinement can be dangerous. ProTech needs polish, restraint, someone who understands legacy. The words slipped icily from her mouth, rehearsed without rehearsal. People nodded. They always did. Then she saw him. Across the room, Josh stood near a marble column, mask understated, posture relaxed. He was speaking French fluid, unforced to a diplomat whose smile widened with each exchange. Josh laughed softly at something said, not performative, not loud, just present. For a moment, Maddie felt an unexpected irritation twist in her chest. He wasn't supposed to look like that. Not calm, not untouched. Music shifted. A subtle cue. The lights dimmed just enough to command attention. Josh stepped onto the stage. Applause rose instinctively. Maddie joined in, her smile sharp, expectant. She assumed this was the moment he would talk numbers, expansion, future dominance. She prepared to critique it later, privately, cruelly. But Josh didn't mention technology. He spoke of inheritance. My grandfather, he began, voice steady, believed that dignity wasn't given. It was endured. The room quieted. He worked nights, cleaned offices, polished floors long after executives went home. He was invisible by design. A screen illuminated behind him. An old photograph appeared, grainy. A young black man in janitor's uniform, holding a mop too large for his frame, standing in a lobby unmistakably opulent. Maddie's breath caught. She recognized that lobby. That building, Josh continued gently, belongs to a family that understands power, or at least, believed they did. A second photo appeared, this one sharper in its cruelty. Her father, younger, smiling, a hand gripping the janitor's collar while others laughed. The room murmured. Maddie laughed too quickly, too loud. "This is absurd," she whispered to the man beside her. "Ancient history." Josh didn't look at her. "Those floors," he said, "paid for my education. Those nights funded patents no one thought a janitor's son could understand. ProTech was born from royalties hidden in plain sight, ignored because no one bothered to look down. Silence pressed in from all sides. Maddie's mask felt heavy, tight. "I didn't hire Maddie by accident," Josh said, finally meeting her gaze across the room. Not accusing, not triumphant, just honest. "I wanted the truth to stand where lies once did." Understanding crashed into her like cold water. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't ambition. It was reckoning. Around her, investors shifted. Whispers sharpened. Eyes lingered, not on Josh, but on her. For the first time, Maddie felt what it was like to be exposed without being touched. Josh concluded softly, "This company isn't about revenge. It's about remembrance and choosing what kind of legacy we carry forward." Applause followed, hesitant at first, then swelling. Maddie didn't clap. She stood frozen, realizing that the war she thought she'd started had begun generations ago, and tonight, it had finally found its voice. The betrayal came quietly, the way most wounds do. It arrived as a headline Josh didn't seek out but couldn't avoid. His phone vibrated again and again on the kitchen counter while the coffee went untouched. Sarah's name appeared first, then a board member, then a journalist he had never spoken to before. When he finally opened the article, the words felt heavier than they looked. "CEO arrested for theft as teen. What was ProTech hiding?" There it was. A grainy mugshot. 16 years old. Too thin. Too serious. A boy who hadn't yet learned how carefully the world watched him. Maddie had found it. She had reached back through decades, through sealed files and forgotten assumptions, and pulled the moment into the light with surgical precision. The article didn't mention context. It didn't mention outcome. It didn't mention that the charges were dropped without explanation. It didn't need to. By noon, the stock dipped. By afternoon, analysts were speculating. By evening, the narrative had already hardened into something familiar and cruel. Criminal past. Questionable leadership. Risk. The boardroom felt different that night. Smaller. Tighter. Faces that once held admiration now carried unease. No one accused him directly. They didn't need to. Silence did the work. "This isn't about judgment," one member said carefully. "It's about optics." Josh listened. He nodded. He thanked them for their concern. He felt every stereotype press against his ribs like a physical force. For the first time since founding ProTech, he wondered if stepping aside would protect what he had built. If sacrificing himself might quiet the noise before it consumed everyone else. That thought scared him more than the headlines. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove south, past the polished edges of the city, back to streets that remembered him before success had smoothed the roughness away. The old neighborhood hadn't changed much, the same cracked sidewalks. The same corner store with faded signage and a bell that still rang too loudly when the door opened. The shopkeeper looked up from behind the counter and froze. "Josh?" he said softly, disbelief warming into recognition. They sat on milk crates by the window, sharing silence before words. Josh didn't explain. He didn't have to. "I saw the news," the man said eventually. "I wondered when they'd use that." Josh swallowed. "I keep asking myself if I should have handled it differently, if I should have known better." The shopkeeper shook his head slowly. "You did the right thing. You always did." He reached under the counter and pulled out an old newspaper clipping, yellowed at the edges. "You remember the wallet?" he said. Josh nodded. He remembered the weight of it in his hand. The panic. The relief when he found the owner's address. The confusion when the police arrived instead of thanks. "They never cared that you were returning it," the man continued gently. "They cared that it was easier to assume you took it." Josh closed his eyes. "The truth," the shopkeeper said, tapping the paper, "was never the point. Control was." Josh left after sunset. The streets hummed softly as he walked back to his car. He felt tired, but lighter. The doubt that had gnawed at him all day finally loosened its grip. This wasn't about one arrest. It never had been. By morning, he was back at the office. His posture was different now, not defensive, not weary, focused. He asked Sarah to schedule a press conference. No apology, he said calmly when she hesitated, and no retreat. When the cameras flashed later that day, Josh stood at the podium alone. He acknowledged the report. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain it away. Then he paused. "I'd like to introduce someone," he said. The doors opened behind him. And in that moment, Josh understood something with perfect clarity. Maddie hadn't just tried to destroy him. She had declared war on truth itself. And he was finally ready to answer. The press conference hall smelled of hot lights and anticipation. Rows of cameras waited like predators trained on stillness, lenses already adjusted, red lights blinking with quiet hunger. Maddie stood just beyond the curtain, arms crossed, chin lifted, listening to the low murmur of reporters settling in. She didn't bother hiding her smile. It lived easily on her face now, fed by certainty. This was where men like Josh broke. She imagined his voice shaking, carefully crafted apologies dissolving into resignation. She imagined the board thanking her later, quietly, for having the foresight to protect the company from him. Her phone vibrated in her hand messages from advisors reminding her to stay composed. She didn't respond. She didn't need them anymore. Josh stepped onto the stage alone. The room hushed. He didn't look like a man preparing to surrender. His shoulders were squared, his gaze steady, his hands resting lightly on the podium as if it were an extension of himself. He acknowledged the questions without answering them, letting the tension stretch until it pressed against the walls. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "I'd like to clarify something." Maddie leaned forward slightly, her smile sharpening. "I am not resigning." A ripple moved through the room. Maddie's smile flickered, then returned, tighter this time. "There has been a great deal of speculation," Josh continued, "about who I am, where I come from, and what kind of person I must be because of a single moment in my past. Today, I want to talk about patterns." He gestured toward the side of the stage. Specifically, he said, about how narratives are constructed. A figure stepped into the light. Luca. Maddie's breath caught so sharply it hurt. Her assistant walked slowly, shoulders tense but head high. His hands shook not with fear, but with something older, something like exhaustion finally allowed to surface. Maddie shook her head slightly, an instinctive warning. Luca didn't look at her. "This," Josh said gently, "is someone who has heard the truth behind closed doors." Luca swallowed. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but unsteady with long-held pain. "I kept telling myself it wasn't my place," he said, "that if I worked harder, stayed quieter, it would stop." Maddie's smile collapsed. Josh nodded toward the technician, "Play the recording." The room filled with her voice, laughing, unfiltered. "Please," the recording sneered. "They'll believe anything. Once a criminal, always a criminal. I've ruined one boy's life before. Doing it again is almost nostalgic." A hush fell so deep it felt physical. Maddie lunged toward the stage. "That's edited," she snapped. "This is illegal." Josh didn't raise his voice. "The recordings are time-stamped, authenticated, and voluntarily submitted," he said, "by someone who finally decided to matter." The press moved instantly. Pens flew. Cameras pivoted, not toward Josh, but toward her. Questions exploded. "Miss Whitmore, did you fabricate evidence? Is this part of a pattern of abuse? Do sponsors know about this?" Maddie backed away, her face pale, eyes darting. Her phone buzzed once, then again, then relentlessly. Contract terminated. Brand distancing statement issued. Legal counsel withdrawing. She turned and ran. The doors slammed behind her, the echo final and unforgiving. On stage, Luca exhaled, a sound that carried years of swallowed humiliation with it. Josh placed a hand on his shoulder, not as a CEO, but as a witness. The narrative had shifted, not because of power, but because truth had finally been allowed to speak. The city stopped returning Maddie's calls. It happened gradually, at first an unanswered message here, a delayed response there, until silence hardened into something absolute. Invitations disappeared. Social calendars erased her name. The same rooms that once opened for her now pretended she had never existed. And yet, every morning she still walked into Protech. Not because she was welcome, but because she was untouchable. The contract sat folded neatly in her bag, its most precious line memorized by heart. Unanimous board approval required for termination. One dissenting vote was enough, and she had made sure of that. Mr. Henderson never met her eyes during meetings anymore, but his vote remained firm. Bought, sealed, and hidden behind procedural language. Maddie clung to that technicality like a life raft, convincing herself it was power, not desperation. Josh watched all of it with quiet attention. He didn't rush. He didn't confront. He understood now that Maddie's greatest weakness wasn't cruelty. It was hunger, an emptiness no applause had ever filled. Status wasn't a desire for her, it was oxygen. So, he fed the illusion. The rumor surfaced carefully, intentionally. A potential merger. An Italian luxury brand with old money and global prestige. Nothing confirmed. Just enough whispers to reach the ears that listened hardest. Maddie listened. Her posture changed overnight. Her eyes sharpened. The desperation she hid beneath arrogance began to leak through the cracks. She dressed louder, spoke more urgently. She needed relevance again, proof that she still mattered. Josh made sure she noticed the dossier. It lay on his desk one evening, unguarded, thick, heavy, labeled in stark black lettering, confidential, illegal offshore accounts. He left his office door unlocked. The building cameras blinked quietly after midnight. Maddie moved through the corridor like a shadow with purpose. She didn't hesitate. Fear had burned out of her days ago, replaced by entitlement sharpened into instinct. She slipped into Josh's office, heart racing, not with guilt, but anticipation. She photographed every page, account numbers, transfers, names, enough to build a threat, enough to sell silence back to him. She smiled for the first time in weeks. She never noticed the red light above the door. Josh watched the footage the next morning without expression. Not triumph. Not relief. Just confirmation. The final piece settling into place. He closed the file and looked out over the city once more. There was sadness, therefore, what people chose when they believed no one was watching. But also clarity. The trap was set, and Maddie had walked into it willingly. The boardroom felt heavier than it ever had, not with tension alone, but with expectation. Maddie sat upright at the far end of the table, spine straight, lips pressed into a smile that trembled with restrained victory. In front of her lay a neatly arranged folder copies, annotations, highlighted figures. Proof, she believed, leverage. She had rehearsed this moment all night. When she spoke, her voice carried confidence sharpened by desperation. "I won't waste anyone's time," she said, letting her gaze sweep the room. "What I have here is evidence of illegal offshore accounts tied directly to Josh Sterling. Funds moved quietly, hidden carefully. Enough to destroy this company if it comes out the wrong way." A few board members shifted. Someone inhaled sharply. Maddie continued, her pulse racing now, adrenaline warming her chest. "I'm prepared to remain silent. In exchange, I expect Mr. Sterling's resignation and a severance package that reflects the damage he's caused me." She leaned back, satisfied. This was the posture she knew. Control returned to her body like a remembered song. Across the table, Josh said nothing. He poured himself a glass of water, took a slow sip. The sound echoed too loudly in the silence. "Maddie," he said calmly, "before we discuss resignations, I'd like to verify something." He turned slightly. Mr. Henderson? Henderson stiffened. His hands, folded moments ago with practiced ease, twitched against the table. Yes? Would you mind? Josh said gently, reading the first account number aloud. Henderson hesitated, then complied. As the numbers left his mouth, his face drained of color. His voice faltered. He stopped. That's not an account, he whispered. Josh set the glass down. No, he said. It's a coordinate. The room froze. Josh stood, moving toward the screen at the end of the room. With a remote click, a map appeared. Pins lit up across the city community centers, shelters, youth programs. These, Josh continued softly, are the charity's ProTech funds through community outreach. Maddie shook her head violently. That's absurd. This is manipulation. Josh turned to her, his voice steady but firm. Those coordinates mark where the money was supposed to go. He paused, let the truth breathe. And where it didn't, a murmur rose, confused and sharp. The so-called illegal accounts, Josh said, were never offshore. They were breadcrumbs, tracers. I wanted to see where the budget disappeared once it left our books. He looked at Maddie, now not with anger, but with something closer to sorrow. It led back to you. The room erupted. What does this mean? You said these were banks. Are you saying funds were stolen? Josh raised a hand and silence followed. Maddie wasn't just negligent, he said quietly. She was embezzling. Redirecting money meant for underfunded neighborhoods to maintain her lifestyle, travel, appearances, control. Maddie stood abruptly, chair scraping. You can't prove that. Josh nodded. We can. He gestured toward Henderson. You helped protect her, Josh said evenly. Your vote kept her here, but it also kept a record. Henderson's shoulders slumped, the weight of his choice finally visible. I didn't know it was this, he whispered. You thought it was procedural, Josh said. That's how harm survives. Maddie's breath came shallow now. The room that once bowed to her no longer looked away. She opened her mouth. No words came. Josh returned to his seat. This ends today, he said. Not because of revenge, but because ProTech exists to serve something larger than ego. The board voted, this time unanimously. And as Maddie was escorted out, the silence she left behind felt like release, not triumph, but truth finally allowed to stand. The doors at the end of the corridor were already open. Cold air rushed in from outside, carrying with it the distant sound of sirens and the unmistakable presence of consequence. Two uniformed officers waited just beyond the threshold, posture neutral, expressions unreadable. Procedure, not spectacle. Maddie saw them and laughed. It burst out of her sharp and brittle, a sound stripped of elegance. As security guided her forward, she twisted back toward the boardroom, eyes blazing, voice cracking through the space she once commanded. You have no idea what you've just done, she shouted. Without my family's connections, this company will collapse. You think reputation grows on idealism? You'll be begging for my help in 6 months. Her words echoed, desperate and defiant, clinging to a world that had already moved on. Josh stood where he was. He didn't interrupt her. He waited. Then he spoke not loudly, not to overpower her, but with the calm finality of someone closing a door that would never reopen. There's one more thing, he said. Maddie stopped struggling. Josh stepped forward, his voice steady. The Italian luxury brand we discussed, the merger you were so interested in. Her eyes narrowed. What about it? It exists, Josh said, but not in the way you assumed. He turned slightly toward the entrance. You might want to meet the owner. Footsteps approached, measured, unhurried. Elena walked in without a mask. She carried herself differently than Maddie ever had. No armor, no performance. Just quiet assurance, worn honestly. Her eyes flicked once toward her sister, not with hatred, but with a tired sadness that suggested a long history of disappointment. Maddie stared at her, stunned. "What are you doing here?" Elena stopped a few feet away. Cleaning up, she replied softly. She turned to the board. "I'm Elena Whitmore, majority owner of Bellatory Group, and yes, this merger was real." Maddie's breath caught. "You can't. I can," Elena said gently. "And I did." She looked at Josh, a brief nod of mutual respect passing between them. "We've been working together for months. Transparency clauses, ethics review, full audits." Maddie shook her head slowly, as if the room were tilting. "You're lying." Elena's voice didn't rise. "You were warned, years ago. About your behavior, about how you treated people." She paused. "The family trust has standards." Silence thickened. "You've been removed," Elena continued. "Effective immediately." "Your actions brought shame, not exposure." Shame. Maddie's shoulders sagged. The words finally reached somewhere deep, somewhere raw. This wasn't corporate loss. This was erasure. She looked at Josh then, really looked at him, not as an obstacle, not as a mistake to be corrected, but as something immovable, a force she had mistaken for kindness and therefore weakness. He met her gaze, not with triumph, but with clarity. The officers stepped forward. As Maddie was escorted out, her voice was gone. There were no more threats left to make, no illusions left to protect her. Josh watched until the doors closed. Elena exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight she had carried far too long. "This didn't have to end this way," she said quietly. Josh nodded. "It rarely does, but it often does." They stood together for a moment, two people who had chosen integrity over inheritance, truth over silence. Outside, the sirens faded. Inside, something lighter took its place. Not victory, but the beginning of repair. The building breathed differently after Maddie left. It wasn't something written into policy or announced in a meeting. It was felt in the way shoulders lowered in hallways, and how laughter returned to rooms that had learned to whisper. Conversations lingered instead of cutting short when footsteps approached. People stayed at their desks a little longer, not out of fear, but because they finally believed their work mattered. Josh noticed it in the smallest moments. A junior analyst speaking up without rehearsing every word, an assistant correcting a director without flinching, Sarah smiling more often, not the careful smile of loyalty under pressure, but something lighter, earned. Toxicity, Josh understood now, didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it evaporated quietly, leaving space where people could finally breathe. He announced the new program on a Monday morning, standing not behind a podium, but among the staff. "The Second Chance Initiative," he said, voice calm, grounded. "We're opening doors to people who were judged too early, people with minor records, people who didn't have mentors when it mattered." He paused, eyes moving across the room. "I was one of them." There was no applause, just stillness, the good kind. Weeks later, young men and women walked through Protect's doors with cautious hope in their eyes. Josh met each of them personally. He listened. He told them the truth, that the world would still test them, but that here they would not be invisible. And for the first time in a long time, the building felt aligned with its name. The visit to the precinct happened quietly. No cameras, no announcements. Maddie sat alone in the holding cell, arms wrapped around herself, makeup faded, posture collapsed inward. She looked smaller than Josh remembered, not diminished, just exposed. When she saw him, her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Here to finish it?" she asked. "To remind me you won?" Josh shook his head. He placed a small paper bag on the bench between them. Inside was a book Italian grammar, well worn. Beneath it, a folded list of names and numbers. "Public defenders," he said. "Good ones." She stared at him, confused. Why? He met her eyes. There was no anger there. No satisfaction. "I don't hate you, Maddie," he said quietly. "I just pity that your world is so small." Her breath hitched, just once. Josh stood. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't need one. As he walked away, he understood something fully for the first time. Revenge had never been the point. Freedom was. Back at ProTech, he stepped into the atrium without warning. The applause began before he could speak. Not thunderous. Not performative. Grateful. He nodded once, humbled. He hadn't protected the company. He had protected the people inside it. And that, he knew, was the legacy that mattered. A year later, the city reflected itself differently in ProTech's glass walls. Morning light spilled across open workspaces where conversations flowed freely, where ambition no longer sounded like fear dressed in professionalism. The company had grown not just in valuation, but in trust. People stayed. People built. People believed. The magazine lay open on a conference table, its glossy pages catching the light. The Innovator of the Year. Not a qualifier in sight. No careful labels. Just Josh Sterling, eyes calm, expression thoughtful, a man defined not by what he had endured, but by what he had created. Josh barely noticed it anymore. He was in a smaller room down the hall, sitting beside a young intern whose hands trembled around a tablet. The boy's tie was crooked, his breathing shallow, eyes darting toward the door as if escape were still an option. "I'm not ready," the intern whispered. "Everyone in there knows more than I do." Josh smiled softly. He reached out, straightened the tie with the same quiet precision he once used on his own cuffs in a room where he had been underestimated. "Everyone in there is still learning," he said, "including me." The intern looked up, startled. "Speak up," Josh added gently. "Your voice matters, even when it shakes." When the presentation ended, the room applauded, not politely, but genuinely. The intern exhaled like someone stepping out of deep water for the first time. Josh watched him leave, shoulders lighter, and felt something settle inside his chest. Later, alone in his office, Josh stood by the window. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, steel and glass, history and reinvention layered into one living thing. He thought of his grandfather, of late nights and polished floors, of dignity earned without recognition. His phone buzzed. A message. From Maddie. "I'm applying for a minimum-wage job. I need a reference. Will you help me?" Josh read it once. He felt no anger, no satisfaction, just distance. He smiled faintly, deleted the message, and placed the phone face down on the desk. Behind him, voices rose, ideas being challenged, laughter breaking through concentration. A team moving forward together. Josh turned back to them. He had work to do, and the past at last had loosened its grip. If this story moved you, if you believe in quiet strength, second chances, and justice earned through integrity, subscribe to the channel and join us for more stories where resilience becomes legacy.